how does that happen? How have you been conditioned to recognize that? And that is all as we continue to explore this digital realm, this digital environment. Those things are almost second nature to us. But 5 years ago, you would have clicked on the respond, or maybe opened up the email at least. So these are just things to consider. This is an evolutionary concept, and we got to keep asking questions. So I'll shut up so you guys can actually ask questions.
One of the other problems that recently has been posed is validating information. It's very easy for somebody to take a small piece of information, go out on the internet and amass this massive amount of facts that all seem related, and present it to somebody who, having seen these for the first time, would say this is incontrovertible proof that this is happening. One of the reporters I've known for years walked up to me last night in the hall and said, "Hey Andy, I saw you did something illegal, it was online." And I'm thinking like, well, what would that be? I don't remember anything recently, you know. I found online some crypto article, you know, saying that I'm a spy for the IRS, and even though I was a special agent, and they had all this information that was documenting the fact that I was a spy for the IRS, and it was almost good reading except for the fact it was just totally false. And when we're dealing with informants, we have to be very careful, not only what they're telling us, but what position and how they were able to obtain that information. Was it firsthand? Was it bogus? Is it research? Because ultimately, if we take bad information and start working with it, we're wasting our time and endangering possibly other people in the process. So what they were alluding to with the data on the internet has actually become a problem because it is so easy to amass a pile of data that is absolutely meaningless, but when presented improperly, looks like it is. I would kind of like to know from the audience, what would you like us to talk about in specific? Because we're not getting a whole lot of questions. I would like to target, you know, your issues. Anybody have any?
Just pick one of them out and ask them, Andy.
Okay, you're close. What do you want to know?
Who, me?
You want to know what the guy's name was online so you could date him? No, I'm not going to go there. Yes, sir. Can you get up to the microphone so we can hear you as well as them?
Can you hear me?
No, turn the microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right. What I'm saying is that on the other hand, the internet is giving you the option of finding recruitments easily. You can use LinkedIn, for example, to find someone who's at a specific position at the company you're targeting. So on the other hand, maybe it's harder to insert a new recruitment because you have many electronic records, but on the other hand, you can easily find someone you're looking for and try to recruit it by email, by finding his phone number, and so forth.
Okay, so when we're talking about recruitment, that's actually a very good point. That's a double-sided sword. In most cases, informants come forth and present data. It's not as common for law enforcement to go out seeking informants. They'll see cooperatives or operatives, but not generally informants.
For law enforcement, but what about military intelligence or CIA and such?
Well, I'm not in the military, but perhaps...
I'm sorry, can you kind of restate your question? I didn't hear it.
Okay. I'm asking about how you can use the internet to recruit new people that can help you for humans.
Right. To become informants on military issues or intelligence.
On your side,
yeah, that's a question that I largely can't answer here. I would say though that I think that the construct is largely the same as you're recruiting somebody for a business position, right? How do you do that? What's your steps? I'm looking for a software dev guy that specializes in Ajax and has, you know, experience in this particular realm. How would I go about that process? Just as how would you go about your process if you wanted to recruit somebody to be an informant or something like that? I think you run the risk of not coming across as legitimate at first, because put yourself in their shoes. Right, you work for this agency. I would say though that I'm not sure what your traditional background is, but the same rules that are used in the physical realm are used online. It's just the tools are different. So the fundamentals, this is my personal opinion, are the same. It's just what tools you use to approach that person. But I think the biggest consideration you should have in that is one of validating and vetting the individual. And at the end of the day, I also believe that you cannot purely have a virtual relationship, whether that's for business, whether that's for informant. At some point, I firmly believe you have to have a physical meeting. It might just be once, but I just think that as humans, we want to at least see the person, even if it's once.
Yeah, but
Well,
internet
actually,
tools
what
like LinkedIn.
you're alluding to, I think, is related to the Wikileaks phenomenon, where you have sites that actually recruit people or solicit people to submit information that they probably shouldn't or probably don't necessarily have the right to submit. And, you know, there's a couple ways that these kinds of sites promote that. Number one, they want to provide anonymity to the submitter. But interestingly enough, if any of you watch TED Talks, the person that heads up WikiLeaks just did an interview there. And the interesting thing was that he kind of hit a chord with me. Anybody that submits information that comes from anywhere in the world, they won't publish it until they've validated it independently. So as you get into a mass market, when you start getting information, it's even more important than ever to be able to vet that information, because any anonymous information, as for the most part, will have a zero value until it's followed up on. Anonymity doesn't breed good information. Generally, we want to know who we're talking to, and once again, all those 4 W's. Who are you? Why are you here? What are you telling us? And what's your reason for telling us that? And once we can answer all those 4 things, then we can evaluate whether we have actionable information or not. Yes, sir.
It strikes me that the combination of Humint and sigint would be really, really beneficial, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. I think there's a number of barriers to like technical analysis and sigint being combined with Humint, from the fact that Humint and LES is usually pretty well protected, plus different communities, different people, they tend to distrust, if not completely dislike each other. What would be kind of some suggestions you'd give that could kind of make that nexus work? Because I think it's completely untapped. Thanks.
So I think you're basically asking, how do we validate information we don't necessarily have the ability individually to do it?
Yeah, well, so I mean, a lot of times like signal intelligence or technical analysis will lead us to something that if we could combine it with Humint, would lead us to a great piece of intelligence by combining.
And that's actually what I alluded to earlier, the trust groups.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of having a cadre of people is that the collective knowledge is much better than the sum of just the parts. So we have people in our groups that are very much into DNS. Somebody else is very much into BGP. Somebody else is really into something else. What I spend most of my time doing is data mining, passive DNS, and spam trap data. Now I'm talking about up to 2.2 million links per 5 minutes of spam data, and probably 3,500 plus DNS connections every 5 minutes, or I'm sorry, every second. So we're dealing with massive amounts of data. But I still require the input from some of the antivirus people to tell me what is significant. I can find botnets just analyzing my data. It's trivially easy to find a FastFlux botnet. Stevie Wonder can find it with these kind of data sets. But what does that botnet do, and how bad is it? So what will happen is, in these groups, we'll publish an email saying, gee, I just saw this botnet. It has 15 addresses, but if you look in the last 24 hours, we can identify over 500 IPs. Anybody have an idea what this does? And we'll put the link out there. And then the antivirus person will take his tool set, run it, and say, this is a packed whatever, it's doing this, and it's going to here. And somebody else will jump on and say, so it's really part of this DDoS mechanism. We work in that area, and this is what the CNC is, the command and control, telling this thing to do the DDoS that you just found that's the malware that disseminates it. So as a wide example, that's really what it takes. There is no one organization that can do it all, and we generally have found that when we work together, we're much more effective. Most of those relationships are very ad hoc and very unofficial.
And the thing that I guess I'm getting at is to give you an example. Some technical analysis will take a botnet and track it back to a region or an area, And oftentimes you'll have some LES group or some LES intelligence out there saying, hey, we picked up a laptop with this sort of information on it. And they're like this far apart, but they'll never talk. Either, the human's LES sensitive, and so it's just never going to go anyplace. And
yeah, I spent most of my career avoiding working with the DoD because of the privacy or the classification. I always had a problem with when something happened, they would try and classify it. So if you had two offices in the Pentagon sitting next to each other, and both of them had the exact same computer and did the exact same thing, and one of them was compromised through some kind of exploit, they would classify it and essentially prevent that person from telling the guy next to him, hey, not for nothing, but like, patch this. I work in a very open environment, and that's what I've thrived on. I was probably one of the very first federal law enforcement to actually take cases we had and put them out on the internet and say, this is what I got, can somebody help me with it? And when you start classifying things, you lose that ability. And the really sad part about all this is that every time you classify an offense, who are you really keeping it from? The bad guys know they did it. So why are we keeping this from others? It's been a problem, and DoD is notorious for doing that. Maybe Dr. Wells would like to just talk about that.
It just seems to me that the diversity of information that you can bring to bear on a problem now just gives you a completely I was listening to somebody today talking about the New York Times being all the news that's fit to print. Somebody says the model of the news right now is we try to get it right sooner. And the point being, what happens right now is you put out a story quickly, and nobody cares much about the initial accuracy. And the way you get accuracy is kind of asymptotically weeding out all the bad information, which is really an interesting skill set of how you accept and how you don't. And so I don't know anybody who's very good at this, quite frankly. I mean, I'd welcome your point about the two offices next to each other, but I'd welcome knowing who actually prides themselves on being able to, winnow out the potentially deceptive or at least inaccurate information quickly.
I agree with you, Lynn. I also think two things. Number one, going back to the Haiti example, I think that was a good example at a small micro level of many disparate organizations working together. I think to answer your question, the best solution often comes from an aggregate of the most dispersed perspectives. The problem in that is coordination and cultivation of all the different opinions, and then sort of having somebody in the middle. The best way to do that is when you can get the problem down to the smallest sort of identifiable end state, i.e., this is crowded around, finding this person. So you bring those other people in who you may not get along with, but at some point, the collective group, there's a mission, guys. That people get excited about doing this, and pretty soon the law enforcement folks bring their data to the table, and then the other folks bring their data, and pretty soon, it's almost like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. You start, querying all sorts of stuff, and everybody comes to the table. And so my answer to you is one of trying to articulate what your end state is in such a small area, and then build around that a diversified group of people that you trust. And maybe that's through a wiki page or something, but people can rally around something they understand and believe in, and maybe whatever problem you're chasing down, once you get that quantified, they'll come to the table. There's a website called, I think it's To Catch a Rat. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. I think it's since been taken down. It was run by a lot of I don't know if that's down or not, but it was run by a lot of the organized crime people up in New England. If you can't tell, I'm from Boston, and the whole point of the website was if you knew a guy that was ratting, an informant, put his picture up. Okay? Well, that doesn't help all those good guys, but if you're on the bad side, that helps you a lot. That's a good example. I mean, you had people posting things up about all these other people. So I guess in this particular instance, if you really want to build a lethal, agile force, keep the